feel like the Jeopardy music has to come on.
Taylor Ellwood here with Magical Experiments, and with me is
Sheena. Hey, everyone.
with Magical Experiments.
Yes.
And as promised, we're going live right now to talk about attention being the new currency.
I mean, our title's a bit of a misnomer. I think attention is like our only currency and everything kind of stems from that. But I think we're starting to really realize it now in this age of distraction.
Yes, we are. Well, I mean, there's something that you said in regards to this episode as we were kind of putting together the outline, which is that it's not money, it's not time. In 2025, our most precious magical resource is attention. And
It is.
I would agree with that. And so, there's a truth that where your attention flows, energy follows. And in a world that's built to fragment you, the magician becomes the revolutionary by reclaiming their attention.
Absolutely. So, what is attention magically?
What is attention magically? Well, I mean, first of all, let's just pause here and say hello to the people who've joined us live, and feel free to leave comments or ask questions as we are broadcasting this, because we do like to have that level of interaction with you. So this isn't, you don't have to just watch, you can participate. So, when I think about attention is directed consciousness. It's life force in motion, the tip of the spear of will. And what do I mean by that? I mean that really, like, where your attention goes is also where your intention is directed and flows. So if I'm paying attention to something, actively paying attention, and there is a real difference between that or distracted attention, then that's where my intention is flowing, and that is part of what is creating that path of manifestation to turn possibilities into reality. What are your thoughts on that, Sheena?
Absolutely. Magic is raising attention, raising energy, and releasing in a specific direction, right? So,
Right. And so
whether
that's
that's
a
with
really
ritual or wand.
ritual, wand, art, writing. I mean, the experience of flow state is a good example of attention. There was a guy named, I'm going to butcher his last name, but Suzuka Mihaly. I think I got it right. It's a pretty complicated name for me to pronounce on that. But he talks a lot about the psychology of flow. And flow is like this state of attention and awareness where you're kind of, it's effortless. It feels effortless. Like if you're writing a book and you're really in that act of writing, or you're painting, or if you're, for example, working on a car or doing something else where it's some type of activity where it takes over and your mind is so focused on it that everything else around you disappears. That's a great example of an experience of flow state that is like the embodiment of intention at its absolute best when we're truly focused.
Yeah. There's such a quality of our attention. And it is, it's the one thing that we always have. It is the one thing that we have the most control over. It's really kind of like the foundation of our magical process. It also really acts as a lens. So how we use our attention, whether we're focusing or diffusing our energy, depends on kind of the clarity and the strength of our intention.
Exactly. Now, again, we've noticed a few more people have joined us. So if you have questions or comments as we're going through this, feel free to drop them in. We do answer those questions live, and we have a lot of fun with it. And I'll mention that a couple times if more people join, because I like to just make sure that people know that. It is absolutely a thrill to connect with you. In fact, well, here's what I'd love to ask our audience here, since they're here. If you could drop in the comments in one word, how would you describe the current state of your attention? So, for example, would you describe it as chaotic, flowing, tired, sharp, or numb, or something else altogether? Like, what's one word that you would use to describe that? And Sheena, why don't we both do that right now? Like, what's one word that you would use to describe your attention in this moment?
In this moment, it is uh, turned on. Is that 2 words?
That's
I
two
can get away
words.
with it, but I can get away with it.
You can definitely get away with that. Um, well, I would say that my attention is focused. It is focused on this, on connecting with you and connecting with our members. But I can also say that, I know what it's like to have distracted attention where, like I'm doing something and there's all kinds of stuff going on around me, and it makes it harder for me to pay attention. I've had that experience in my life. I still have it occasionally, not as much now because I think I've really learned over the years how to focus my attention and awareness both magically and mundanely. But I know that feeling where it's like I might be in a conversation with someone, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and I start getting caught up in what's going on in the background. And of course it sucks because I'm not paying attention to what that person's saying or doing, and they can pick it up. I'm sure you've had that experience before as well.
All the time. And I think that, we tend to think like attention is static or, there's a level that, we have to strive for or to achieve, a benchmark. We like to judge ourselves, that personal development, but there are so many things that are affecting our attention. I happen to be HSP, so, you know, I'm hearing, I'm getting so much more stimuli than some other folks do. There's a bunch of different, reasons, circumstances where our attention is maybe not always what we want it to be. So part of it is like giving ourselves a lot of grace and also like really looking at attention as kind of a something that moves and transforms and really allows us to like we have to be in relationship with our attention. And that's really how we start to focus it.
That's interesting. So, what do you say more a bit about that? Like, what does that mean to be in a relationship with your intention?
I mean, so one of the things that we were exploring when we did our attention entity class is like, what is our relationship like with it? You know, sometimes, the stories that we tell ourselves, oh, I can't focus, or oh, I'm such a scatterbrain, or, there's all of these stories that we tell ourselves. Um, there's stories that other people tell us about our attention, or sometimes we're punished because, you just can't pay attention, or we're forced to hold our attention in a way that works for other people, or, it works for the school system, it works for, external sources. So a large part of it is like, as a magician, is like reclaiming your attention is like, what does that actually mean for you? And my ability to have full attention in this moment might be totally different from, next Tuesday or wherever my hormonal cycle is or anything like that. So part of it is like really getting to know how your attention can be nourished and just what its natural ebbs and flows are.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, for me, for example, one thing that I've really had to pay attention to is the way that I hear, because I actually pick up lots of environmental sounds around me. And so if I'm in conversation with someone and there's a lot of noise in the environment, I know that that is going to be a little distracting. So what I've learned to do is to focus my attention on my hearing very deliberately to pick up what that person is saying. And sometimes that means actually even shutting out another sentence. So I might close my eyes. It doesn't mean that I'm not paying attention. If anything, I'm paying more attention because what I'm doing is I'm removing one source of stimuli to focus on another. And of course, we can apply this on a mundane way, but we can also apply it magically. So this is actually a skill that I like to use when I facilitate people. If we're doing some deep internal work, I will shut my eyes and actually just focus on listening to them, really allowing my psychic awareness to reach out at the same time and connect with them in order to better facilitate that experience. Because my eyes can actually be more of a distraction from fully connecting with them. Whereas if I am just focusing on the listening, I'm also extending outward my psychic awareness to fully connect with them.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a trick that I learned from one of my mentors, Vince, who we did this actually. It was actually the beginning of April. We did this where he actually blindfolded a couple of people at the training, and they were facilitating a person going through, and it was fascinating to observe. So then I started trying it. I've started trying it the last couple of times that I've sat in circle with other men, for example, and use that as a way to facilitate. So I've been trying experimenting with it, and when I think about it, I mean, I've done a lot of extrasensory practices before. So I even tried it like when doing qigong one night with friends, just focusing on closing my eyes and paying attention. And it was fascinating how much more deeply I went into the experience when I shut down the eyes, because the eyes actually take up a lot or take in a lot of things, and they're processing all that information. I think there was something I read somewhere where, like, when you with your eyes, you take, like, it's using up like about 40% of your brain in terms of like your active thinking process and everything else, just to process all that stimuli from your eyes. So when you shut that down, you're actually freeing up a lot of resources so that you can focus your attention in a different way.
Wow. So, what do you notice are some like the big things that like are really like when we say, that there's a war for attention, like what do we mean? How does that show up in our world as magicians?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, to the audience, feel free to drop in the comments here where you noticed your attention being hijacked as we're talking about this, because we're going to talk a little bit about what hijacks. So if you notice something, share it in here. And of course, again, if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop them in. This is a community connection here, so that we're giving you the opportunity to connect with us as we do this. So, for example, for me, what I would say, or what I've noticed, is like social media, for example. Like Facebook doom scrolling is a great example. I actually don't go on Facebook that much anymore, because most of the time what I see on there is a lot of stuff that's like political or whatever else. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be aware of those things, but it definitely stands out to me in terms of how it can hijack my attention and actually stop me from being creative. Another thing that I like to do is, or that I notice with attention, is news. News is a great example. If I go and I start watching or looking at news, regardless of what it is, that can also take up attention. And then, there's worry loops, worrying about stuff. In fact, it's so easy to worry because it's such a reflexive thing to do. It's like, oh, well, at least I'm doing something. Well, yeah, what I'm doing is I'm letting my energy be tied up by that worry. What would you say are some examples of where attention gets hijacked? And I see we did get a comment, but we'll address that in a moment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was guilty of getting sucked into like the Facebook back and forth with my sister yesterday. Um, and it's like, and it, but it's like one of the things that I really realized through that experience was, part of when our attention gets diffused for so long, it's like we tend to collapse. We go into overwhelm, we go into helplessness, and it's like, well, I can't make changes. Like all these big things are happening, and I can't make change because, I'm just one person. And then it kind of goes into that. And the point that I was not very elegantly trying to get across, it's like when we look at like our sphere of influence and control, and that's my favorite question for actually like bringing attention back home is what is within my sphere of influence and control, and then act on that. Um, because if we are acting from within that, if we're applying ourselves magically and through mundane action, it's like then our spheres open up, or it connects with other people who are doing similar things, and that's really how we create change or create something new. um so I'm actually going to create an attention entity tonight. I didn't create one during our class because I was like trying to feel out, like, what's the one that I want to be doing. And I'm going to create an attention entity that kind of gently redirects me and actually starts funneling my energy. If I find myself going into that like, oh, well, it's not within my sphere of influence and control, to actually channel the energy into the actions that I'm currently taking that are.
Well,
So there's
and another
that.
reason you didn't create the entities because you were teaching the class with me. So it was a little you were focused on teaching the class, which I'm glad you were.
Yes, but I like to do it as we go. Um, some of the other forces include like there's a lot of internal forces, like I mentioned, like hormones. If you have different health things going on, trauma responses are huge because you can be like hyper vigilant. You can become anxious. You can you can hyper focus your attention in ways that actually key up your system. Um, Worrying or trying to feed those like dopamine loops with your attention, fatigue, all of these different internal and embodied sources can also just kind of hijack us.
Yeah. So we got a comment. I want to just kind of briefly address that, and then we'll continue on. Uh, Nima Atsuzui said, "Interesting. I have a similar experience. Closing my eyes helps me focus and feel less distracted when I need to be present or focused. I do it a whole lot when doing readings and such. There's too much visual stimulation for me, and I have a hard time staying on track. So closing my eyes helps tons." Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, this is a good example where we can actually look at subtracting out a given sense in order to discover what the other senses reveal to us. Sight's a good one, but like another example would be like if you're doing meditation, putting on a weighted blanket, because
Hmm.
that weighted blanket is actually going to suppress your experience of touch. It'll focus you more on the kinesthetic awareness. I've done this before when in terms of just creating really good trance states for myself and other people where we'll put the blanket on, we'll blindfold them, and then it just creates this deep internal process that allows you to go much deeper into yourself. And it's one of the reasons why I actually like to use blindfolds sometimes for that reason. And I mean, you can do other things. You could, for example, put earplugs in so that you're not, like in terms of hearing and stuff, so that you're actually stopping that up for a bit, or at least bringing it down. Um,
Hmm.
so it's a good example of like get creative with your experiments around how you can direct your attention, because it can actually become a really powerful way of um, taking control of your attention.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, communicate it. Um, like especially like if you're doing readings for someone and you want to close your eyes or you're tapping in, even just saying that um, can really just help let other people know and allow them to like their attention to relax a little bit because they're not going into their own mind loops of oh why are they closing their eyes or why are they acting in this way or that way. It really just allows both parties attention to really like be centered. So don't be afraid to ask when you're doing these things or to communicate your needs.
So before we continue on, I also want to mention this is our kickoff video for Magical May. We've got a lot of fun stuff planned for this month. We have ultimate guides coming out for paid subscribers, and we have a special challenge mid May that we're going to be running a 5-day challenge that's going to be dealing with how to take control of your financial slash money anxiety and turn it into a source of wealth generation and abundance. That's also going to be for paid subscribers, but we're going to also be doing another live video together. We're going to be doing a couple of other things. So, and of course, we're going to have some great content that's out there for people who are, getting the free subscription. So, like, no matter what, you're going to get something amazing for Magical May. I just want to note that because this is our kickoff event, and happy Beltane.
Happy belting. Hmm.
Let's talk about like how do we recognize signs that our attention has actually been fragmented? Like what are some things that you would say you notice like when your attention's fragmented? And again, audience, feel free to drop in a comment as well.
Yeah, I would love to hear how everyone else's attention gets fragmented. For me, yeah, it is that feeling very overwhelmed, or very numb, a little bit of like that disassociation, like the inability to like really call my attention back forward. Um, it's also sometimes that like, that hyper focusing on something, and it's the wrong thing, but it's just like it's that laser focus on something that doesn't matter sometimes, for sure.
For me, I would say a good example was earlier today. I did a live interview for the Men's Mystery Substack earlier this morning, and then I did another interview on Zoom. And I knew that like I wasn't going to be able to show up to this interview, this conversation. It's not really an interview; it's a conversation because that's what we're doing here. We're magical experimenter collaborators, and among other things. So it was just kind of one of those cases where it was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to show up here unless I do something. So what I knew I needed to do was to ground myself by going for a walk and actually just getting away from the screen. Sometimes I
Mm,
find I get screen fatigue. I'll be looking at a screen all day long, and it's kind of like, which is one of the reasons why I like to get up and walk around and do some kung fu exercises and things like that, because it helps me to bring my focus in. How about though with magical workings? Like when do you see this showing up in magical workings, where this attention gets fragmented? Because I mean, we're talking a bit about
yeah,
some mundane examples.
yeah. I have found it took me a long time to figure it out, because when I started doing magical workings, or if I'm work doing a group exercise or something like that, um, my brain and my processing internally tends to happen very quickly, and then my brain will just squirrel onto something else. And I used to judge myself really harshly for that. I can't, I can't do a 20-minute path working. Um, and I used to judge myself. I used to say like, I used to consider that I was like, a failure because I couldn't do it. Um, so that can be a sign, but often it's if I'm bored, like if everything just kind of feels flat, um, or there's just no energy behind it. If there's no energy, there is no attention for me.
No, that's accurate. That's true for me too. Like if there's no energy, there's no attention, right? I think for me a good example would be sometimes like trying to force myself to do something longer than I ought to. I mean, I've seen this certainly with writing, which is one of the reasons why I pace myself with my writing now. And I'm not like, oh, if I get to a certain point, and I consider writing a magical act. I'm like, okay, if the energy isn't here, the magic isn't flowing. But like doing a ritual sometimes, like if it's not engaging me fully, I'm gonna actually look at it and be like, okay, maybe this isn't the right approach or the medium. And I'm also not, as you know, I'm not a fan of needless complexity.
True.
I think that one of the things that kind of grabs our attention away is when we make things overly complicated, and we actually tie our energy and attention up in that complication. And it might be something that we don't fully understand or get, or it might be a worry, or it might be something else, but it's something that eats away at our ability to focus our attention and get results. And that's not something I want to deal with. So one of the things that I like to do is pare stuff down as much as possible in my life in general. I mean, I eat the same breakfast every day. I eat the same lunch every day. Why do I do that? I mean, A, it's food and I like it. And I don't need that much variety, but also it just reduces the needless complexity. I'm not thinking about like having to make that decision. I'm not having decision fatigue. Instead I'm able to focus that attention and and really stay focused so that when I need to make a decision for ritual, I'm able to give my best effort. And that's a huge thing. I see we got another comment. I tend to feel physically shut down and disconnected. I can't feel/sense the energy flow, and mentally my mind feels scattered and dull. Oof. Yeah, I get that.
Yep, that's a very, very good description. That
What
dullness.
about
It's
feeling? What about feeling disillusioned or overwhelmed as well? Like, I mean, I think that kind of connects with that there, but also just like maybe not like not re- like kind of just feeling kind of like what's the point? you ever had that experience?
Yes, and that usually comes when I'm trying too hard. And that also goes kind of back into that needless complexity. Like, and there is, we tell ourselves all these stories, oh, it has to be hard work, or we have to, have a big reveal, or, like a big sense that something has changed. So we try to focus for extended periods of time, or the ritual says you have to do it 100 times or something like that. We try to maintain a focus, and sometimes that actually works against us. you know 30 seconds of incredibly powerfully, like, directly focused attention is worth an hour of struggling through to keep your focus.
That's true. And I mean, really, sometimes I think it really boils down to if it ain't flowing at that time, let it go. You can always come back to it later. There's nothing that says you have to do a magical ritual at a specific time. I know sometimes people get really caught up on timing and stuff like that. But I've done full moon rituals, for example, where it was the day before the full moon or the day after. It's still in the zone. And more importantly, it was when it was in the zone for me. So instead of trying to make something happen at a specific time, I recognized that I wasn't going to feel that way, or maybe there was going to be stuff going on that where it was going to be busy or whatever. And I allowed myself to come to it when I knew I was going to be ready for it. That was far more important than the exact timing. And I think that that's a really important way to make that work.
Absolutely, and that comes back to having a relationship with your attention, because it's like fundamentally having a relationship with yourself and understanding your own energy flows. And it's like, I do my magical workings first thing in the morning, because I know that that is the time where my attention and focus, or I might be kind of coming out of a liminal state and doing dream work. So, my attention focuses differently during that time than, trying to do something at the end of the day, or, after I've eaten a heavy meal or something.
Yeah, and actually, one of the reasons I meditate midday is because that's like a perfect time period where I know I'm already kind of feeling a little distracted. That's a great way for me to let my mind rest and sharpen. And the meditation is really it's not necessarily about even trying to do anything. It's just allowing myself to let my consciousness drift, my creativity and imagination flow through. This kind of then kind of brings me to the next area or subject that we want to explore around this, which is reclaiming attention as a magical act. So, what are some things that we can do to reclaim attention? And again, folks who are on here, if you have suggestions or ideas or just comments in general, feel free to drop them in. We love hearing from you, as you can tell, because we've already responded to a couple of comments.
Yeah, especially for this section, the knowledge sharing about reclaiming our attention. We all have different ways of doing it. So I would love to hear, and I will try anything that anyone suggests. So give me a challenge. We like to experiment.
Yeah, that is what we are all about. Well, I mean, as I shared, like giving yourself a time to like meditate in the middle of the day, you know, giving your doing something like that can be helpful. For me, one of the other ways that I like to reclaim retention is honestly to just do something different. And that doing something different could be, for example, doing like a qigong movement or kung fu. It could be a breath work or lighting a candle and paying attention to that, or doing something else to shift my entire field in within a given minute of time. What about you, Sheena? What's something you do?
Right now, I'm working on the mundane aspect of it, and I'm really looking at kind of an attention diet. So really curating what I consume, and also what is consuming me and my attention. So there's kind of like the both sides of that. Making the shift from Facebook to Substack for magical experiments in general, and for us has been a huge um, blessing is the word that comes to mind. I don't know why. Um, but it's because it allows us to be so much more focused in both our consumption and, when we're producing content. And it allows us to really be focused. doing and having interactions that really matter. Um, so looking at, what you're, as my mom, oh, I can't believe I'm going to quote my mom, but garbage in, garbage out. Um, you know, everything that we do put in, our brain has to process. We have to fit into, our narrative, our experience, our stories. So just cutting down the amount of input coming in and being very selective about it. And also just noticing like who either internally what is robbing us of our attention. So, the stories that we tell ourselves, our old patterning, old habits, and also who's actively co-opting our attention. One of my favorite sayings that I use is, an instant message does not mean instant response. Like we're so trained, like Pavlov's dog, that we have to respond instantly. Um, or there's lots of studies about how if you have a email interruption when you're in flow state, that can take up 15 to 30 minutes to actually get back into flow state after you've been interrupted. So I'm working on the attention diet right now.
It's actually one of the reasons I keep my sound off on my phone. I never have my sound turned on, and that makes a significant difference. I will make it a point to respond or keep track of certain things with my notifications, like anytime I get a voice note from you. But other than that, it's pretty. I'm pretty careful about it. And yeah, one of the reasons I'm really glad that we're on Substack is it gives us more of a chance to interact and connect with the people, like all the people that are on here right now. But being able to do that in a concentrated way, whereas like being on Facebook, it's just hard to fight through that algorithm to connect with people in a meaningful way, and it's really hard to have a meaningful connection on there because it's just become so bloated with the algorithm and the ads and the everything else that actually keeps people from having meaningful engagement. Looks like we got another comment. I like to breathe through different body parts. Often it's heart
Mm.
breathing, but depending on the situation, I do liver breathing or spleen. While doing that, I really like moving my hands to move the energies around me. I also like to take a minute or two and notice something right in front of me and describe as much about it as I can. Oh, wow, those are great practices. It reminds me a bit of core breathing, which is like a Franz Barden talks about it, but it's yeah, breathing through like the skin, but yeah, breathing through the organs. That is a great example. Thank you for that.
I love it. I can't actually see who left the comment because of where my stand
It
is,
was
but heart
it was
breathing.
Nima Atui.
I love that. That was so heart breathing. Sorry, I have to go on like a little side note here, just because it's really that just excites me. Is uh, one of my mentors, like when I was kind of having this is more in like the medicine and shamanic community that I'm a part of. My mentor said, "You have to breathe from your heart." And I was in great resistance. And he said, "Okay, you just imagine that there are two nostrils, like just smack right on your heart, and you breathe in and out, and you breathe through your heart nostrils." And that was such a kind of amazing image. It kind of broke my brain a little bit, but then it's like, oh, I got it. So yes, I love that. Thank you.
I'll share a story about that too. I had a couple of experiences like in November, December, where I was doing a lot of it, very intense internal work. I'd gone to a couple different events, so a couple of like men's work events and a weekend that was staffed by both men and women, and I was doing a lot of work around my heart. And it was really interesting to breathe through that and to feel my heart melt. I feel like I literally gave myself years back on my life just by doing that work because I was dissolving a lot of internal blockages and trauma and releasing that. And suffice to say, I also think that it's only helped me to show up even more fully in relationship with you, Sheena, because of having that out of the way so that I could really focus on being fully with you and not from a place of trauma, but from a place of genuine love and connection. And there's real magic in that in and of itself.
Absolutely. So
What
there's
about attention alters?
I was just about to go there. Yes.
All
Um,
right.
I love I I'm very organic, and part of a large part of my magical process is finding or creating altars themselves. And like it's really putting attention into and the intuitive side of like, why this thing? And my favorite thing to do is to create little attention altars. So these are altars that I'm putting attention into as I'm creating them, but they're also little touch points. So I have one in my bathroom that kind of like an attention altar for health. I have one in my office, which is an attention altar for creativity. I have one in my bedroom for attention on dreaming. But just having them in the environment also just allows me to like tune in, and it's kind of a reminder to focus my attention. Um, so attention altars.
I love it. Yeah, no, that's a great example. I've got a couple of attention altars myself. Like for example, one in my office, one in my bedroom. So yeah, I totally get it, and I think it's absolutely a powerful thing. There's a quote that I want to draw on here. Attention is the architect of reality. Wherever you build with it, structures form. That was a really fascinating quote. You shared it, and I thought it really struck with me because, like what we put our attention to is what we create. What we do for what we do in general. And it looks like we got to thank you for the attention altar. You're welcome. And again, for anyone else who wants to comment, feel free to drop them in. As you can see, we're very responsive here. And it's a great way to focus your attention on what we're sharing so then you can get some kind of response from it. But either way, we're just happy to have all of you here. But I think that that's a good example. Like wherever you build with it, structures form. So it's like, what are the structures that we want to be forming with our lives? What is it that we want to be creating? I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm on Substack. I'm a creator. I'm a content creator. I love to create stuff like this. I love to create articles. I love to create challenges and things like that. And just in general, it's just such a fascinating and wonderful experience to be able to focus attention in that way and create something meaningful and powerful and special.
Absolutely. Um, and I think one of my other favorite things is to single task as spell work.
Hmm.
And it seems really simple, and it is. It's literally focusing on one thing and then making that the spell work or making that the magical act. And I think that that's because, we multitask. We're taught to multitask, but we're not actually multitasking. We're like task switching very quickly. Or, we might be, how many times have you injured yourself or tripped over something, cut yourself when you're cutting vegetables just because like your attention is wandering. So one way of training and building my attention kind of as like as as a muscle, but also as a magical muscle, is I will, whatever single task that I'm doing, I will give it my entire attention and use that, whatever I'm creating. If I'm chopping vegetables, I'm usually working on like health magic or body magic, something like that. Um, if I'm doing dishes, like being fully absorbed and immersed in doing dishes, because that is cleaning, my energy field or whatever it happens to be. But single tasking as spell work can be a really good way of just like, and fun. It makes more meaning and it brings more to, that's how I multitask. I'm like, if I can make this mundane thing magical, then, you're just getting extra practice in.
I actually call that low effort magic. And the reason why is because you're
Hmm.
already doing it. So
Yes,
you're already putting effort in. So you don't have to put much more effort into it magically because you already have what you're doing right there. And it's a really powerful way. So like if you're brushing your teeth, for example, you're putting effort into brushing your teeth. Well, why not then put that toward, okay, I'm going to clean, or purify myself through the act of brushing my teeth. Or like you said, cleaning dishes or cleaning your house. I mean, those are all great examples of that. So speaking about that, what about, crafting spells with attention? I mean, I think that one of the things that happens, and certainly with spell books, is I see like, here's a list of components that you need. And I think sometimes that ends up actually distracting away from the power of attention. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. Like, I think correspondences can be very useful, and your personal correspondences, of course, are always going to be the most powerful for you. Um, I do think that sometimes our attention becomes so hyper focused on, oh, I have to get the right thing, or it has to be this specific way, that sometimes we get overwhelmed and we just go, oh, I can't do the magical working because I don't have a green candle.
Yeah. Well, and so I mean, in that case, what do we do? So I mean, I think that there's like, how can we take something where maybe we don't have that green candle, but still pull off the magic? What are what's an idea that you would have or suggest for somebody who's watching this right now that they could do?
Again, attention is the greatest tool that we have. So, like, instead of overloading spells with ingredients, like, just again, even just 30 seconds of like that pure focused attention on something,
Hmm.
whether that's a sigil or a phrase. We're going to be doing some fun sigils in our challenge week. I was working on that today, so that'll be good. Um, but just practicing with your raw, directed, conscious, focused awareness. Um, so again, for charging things, if you want to, for birthing entities, things like that, just having that conscious, focused attention as you're releasing it into the world. Um, Scrying, you have a whole book on scrying.
I
Um,
do. Scrying the divine.
okay,
Yeah.
so how can we use scrying devices?
So I like to do something really interesting, and this is actually a great example of experimenting with attention. I like to use multiple scrying devices at the same time. Now, you're probably thinking like, how could you possibly do that? Well, it's really simple. Take a candle, for example, any color. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be green, and have a mirror in the background. It could be a black mirror. That's my preference, but you could also use a clear mirror if you want. Stare through the candle flame at the mirror. What you're doing is doing double scrying, essentially, or dual scrying. You're scrying through the flame into the mirror itself, and you're using both experiences to kind of pull and harness your attention. It actually creates what I call a state of fascination, because it actually takes the sensory input that you're having and it focuses it on that that awareness of those two objects, so that the only thing you're focused on is the candle and the mirror, and then the back and forth. And what's really interesting is that you can play around with optical illusions with that, because we all have what's known as a blind spot in our eyes. So basically what happens with the blind spot is that it fills in visual information for us.
Uh-huh.
But if you can figure out where the blind spot is, so to speak, and you can do this with this kind of exercise, what you'll discover is that if you're looking at the candle, you're looking through the candle, you'll actually see what I'll call is like a experience where there's like two candles suddenly. Suddenly you have two candles there. You have one candle here, one candle there. We only have the one, but what happened is it's created an optical illusion. And I've actually used that to stare between the two candles using the blind spot to basically help me do that and look into the mirror. And that's actually increased the scrying effect. And I talk about this in my book, Scrying the Divine, which y'all can check out, and we'll have it in afterwards in the show notes. We'll have a link to it there. But it's a really good example of how you can harness your attention. But whether you're working on with a spirit or you're doing internal behavior modification, which is basically what the book's about, both of those things. But just in general, it's a fascinating way to explore it, especially when you can harness those optical illusions.
Yeah, and part of it is also about training and expanding your attention and your conscious awareness, um, which has all sorts of magical applications.
It really does. I mean, it's helped me to focus my mind and had allowed me to connect with spirits in a really interesting way. One of the reasons I wrote that book is I'd actually taken a course on scrying, and I thought it was really fascinating what the person talked about in regards to the environment. So I started designing the environment very carefully. I made sure that the curtains were drawn over, that there was like, it was just natural light for the most part. And then I got curious and I was like, could I use more than one device? So, I started using a mirror and a flame, or I would use like a crystal bowl and a sigil, which would be placed at the very bottom of the crystal bowl. Um, and then I would use like a candle in the crystal bowl or do other things. And I found that like the more that when I experimented with those different devices and used them in conjunction with each other, it not only did the optical illusion kind of play a role in the focusing, but it also it created, as I said, that deep trance state of fascination, which made my
Hmm.
mind much more open, um, and receptive to spirit contact. But recommend that to anyone who like wants to learn how to communicate with spirits. It could be a really powerful way to explore that. Another thing that you can do, or that I like to do, is use art magic. So I love painting and drawing and things like that. And one of the reasons why is because it does create that state of flow. It's the same thing with writing, but with art, I think it's a little bit easier for me because I can just pick up a paintbrush. I'm not even thinking about the words. I just start painting and create that magical working through the painting, and it focuses the attention. And that's actually how I do most of my magical workings these days. I mean, I do some other things, but a lot of times I will usually integrate some element of art because it captures the attention and focuses it in a way that's really powerful. And we actually have, over on your side of it, we actually have a collage that you and
Oh,
I and another person made,
yeah, we do.
and that was a great
So,
example of art magic right there.
and it was very much a process of harnessing our attention as we're going through. I mean, it's on the way. It's like, well, it's a vision board that seems so simple, but when you bring attention to the magical process itself and every word on it, and like you're really like putting that conscious energy and attention onto it, it just amplifies it. And that also brings up a really interesting aspect of attention magic as well, is how other people's, and of course it works both ways. This is why there's such a war over for your attention versus for marketing and trying to get you to buy things, trying to get your attention, is because other people's attention is a magical act and can be magical fuel. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, for sure. There actually in one of the classes that I teach, it's called the Ultimate Sigil Magic Course. I talk about what's known as attention stacking. So,
Mm.
it's a good example where if I put a sigil up on the screen, or like I share it on Facebook or Instagram or whatever else, I'm actually, for even just a brief moment, capturing someone else's attention, and that becomes fuel for the sigil. Why is that the case? Because let's be honest here, if we're scrolling through something or we're looking, for a moment we're giving our attention to something else. We're actually giving energy to it. Again, it goes on the principle of where your attention goes, your energy flows or follows. And so that's a great example of how someone can harness your attention if they want to. This is one of the reasons why I think it's really, really useful to kind of take a look at that and consider, like, there's a reason why, like with marketing and branding, for example, they use brands. That branding is an effort to grab the attention of the person.
Hmm.
What's the first thing you think of when you think of the golden arches, for example, for McDonald's? Well, you start thinking of fast food. It's a good example. That's a magical act in and of itself. You might not think of it as that, but it is because of the way it captures the attention. So that
Yeah,
can
and
be a
pretty much,
really good example.
yeah, pretty much any logo is a sigil.
So this kind of brings up a really important principle, which is that the less divided your attention is, the more live wire your magic becomes. And so what does that really mean is like, look at where your attention is going. Look at where it's being taken up. One of the reasons I don't really eat at fast food restaurants anymore, I don't want to put my attention or energy toward that. So I've very deliberately become aware of like how those logos work. I know what they're trying to signal, and I'm like, no, I don't want to give that energy to it. I have separated myself out from that, and I think that's really important. And as a result, healthier lifestyle, which hey, yay me. But that's one of the benefits of reclaiming your attention. Like what you give your attention to, take it back. You can. All of us
Mhm.
can take attention back. One of the ways you
Yeah.
could do it is through, for example, creating an attention entity, which she and I just taught a class on recently, and we may end up offering something like that again down the line. But another way to do it is, through some other practices. In fact, we actually have a way for you to focus on that. It's called attention mapping. Sheena, can you talk a little bit about that and what that is?
Yeah. So this is a challenge or a magical experiment, if you would like to join us. And really what it is it's a really simple kind of attention audit. So like for the next 24 hours or 48 hours, you kind of get a good sample of like home time, work time, kind of just living your daily life. But every hour or half hour, whatever feels good to you, just jot down, where's my attention? Or just getting into the habit throughout the day of like, where's my attention now? And if you start keeping track, you really start to notice where your attention leaks are or where your attention is like literally getting ripped away from you. And I think one of the things to keep in mind with attention is it is tied into, our emotions, like our emotional power, our raw emotional energy, which, is also can be uh, subverted or strengthened. And it's part of our energy which we can use for magical acts. So just asking yourself, like, was my attention directed towards my goals, my magic, my creativity, or was it hijacked? What was it hijacked by? Was it like distraction, anxiety, consumption? And once you have that, you have a pretty good map of what your attention is and where your relationship with it might need some like strengthening or redefining or just bringing some more actual consciousness or attention to your attention.
That's great. That's a good example. So, one of the things that we would invite you to do is to take the attention mapping challenge. Take a journal with you, and for the next 24 hours, once on the hour, write down what your attention was focused on. Obviously, if you're sleeping, you won't be able to do that. But even when you wake up, you could even note in your dream, like what you recall from your dreams. What stood out to you? What were you paying attention to in the dream? What was,
Yes,
yeah, what were you going to say? You're going to say something there.
the first thought that you have upon waking is really important. From kind of like a dream perspective and working with things magically that way, but also it is an indicator of your mental state and your default mode network and what's really showing up for you. So are you waking up like, oh, anxious thought, I forgot I have to go pick up the kids, or oh my god, I have to check Facebook, or whatever that first thought is will tell you so much. Like if you don't do any other mapping but you just pay attention to that first thought of the day, and then how long can you hold your attention before all of those thoughts start coming in?
That's beautiful. Yeah. And then moving forward from here, we're going to try that integration. But what's a small ritual practice that you would suggest someone could practice, even for just like 3 minutes?
My favorite is a coffee meditation. Uh, and it's something, again, it's like that single action that you can do every day. Um, so I like a coffee in the morning. Some folks like tea, for some it's a green juice, whatever it is, but really ritualizing it. And so, we tend to be like, oh, we're just drinking a beverage and we're checking our email and we're, running around getting ready for our day. But even if you just take like 3 minutes and use it as a meditative or a focusing tool for your attention. So really just like feeling the liquid going down your throat, putting attention to that, feeling, if it's warm, how it feels like in your hands, like really engaging all of your senses and focusing them into the attention of whatever it is that you are drinking. It's also just a really good habit to get into when you're eating. If you are trying to eat healthier or you're trying to lose weight, just like bringing attention to your food is a real easy way to just even start that relationship of, the attention with yourself. Am I full? Am I being
Yeah,
nourished?
yeah, that's something that I've gotten better at doing. I wasn't always so good at that, but like paying attention. Am I feeling satisfied right now? Not even am I feeling full. Am I feeling
Mm,
satisfied? Because
yeah.
full could actually still mean that you ate too much, in my experience. Um, so feeling satisfied as opposed to that. But yeah, I agree with that. One thing I like to
And
do. Can I share what I was gonna, or do you need to go?
I was gonna say that satisfying, like I feel like that like needs to be like highlighted and blown up because that's true for everything, for every interaction, whether that is reading articles or doing your magic. It's like, am I satisfied? That's a really good barometer. So I just want to like sparkle it.
Am I satiated?
Sufficiently sophisticated, as my grandmother would say.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was going to add to that that I like to do, kind of along a similar vein, is stretching in the morning and just
Mhm.
really paying attention to my body. I have a saying, wake your body up, and the mind and soul will follow. And I feel like that's really true. So just taking the time to connect with my body in the morning and just doing some stretching for a good 5 to 10 minutes can be one of the most nourishing ways to take care of myself. And it also focuses my attention on checking in with myself and seeing where I'm at and calibrating with my overall sense of being instead of just rushing to check my phone, read email, do all the other things that so easily could take up my time, but really aren't necessarily good things to do. And then, sometimes I think having, like, if you have somebody that you're sharing your life with, having a ritual with that person can be another way that you can focus that attention. It could be something really simple or profound, but it should be something that is personal to you, and
Yeah,
it's something that's powerful for you. I know, for example, you and I have a ritual that we do each day. I'm not going to really share it here, but it's a good example though because it really focuses. It serves for me to focus my attention on you and attune myself to you and the work that we're going to do. And I feel like in turn, it does the same thing for you.
absolutely. And that's also a really good kind of check, especially like in your relationship. So many people have oh, I'm going to give you the kiss when you leave the house, when you go off to work type of thing, or oh, you're coming into the house, I'm going to give you a hug. You can tell if somebody has their attention fully engaged in that act. Sometimes it's like it's so mechanical or it's so rote and you don't even realize you've done it till the person's gone. It's like, oh. And sometimes it's like that is the thing. And the I think one of the things that other than being like magic and being like, our attention is the biggest gift that we also have. You know, time, everything else, like it flows from attention. And if you want to create any sort of change in your life, magical or mundane, directing your attention is the gift. It is the biggest impact that you can have.
So I think in closing here, one, I just really appreciate again like how we've continued to explore attention outside of even just the class that we taught recently, which was a lot of fun. But I think one thing I would ask, and for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions or comments before we wrap up here in the next few minutes, feel free to put those in because we want to make sure that we answer them. But secondly, we want to invite you to commit to a ritual that you'll give your full undivided attention to. It can be as simple as brushing your teeth or doing like the coffee meditation that Sheena mentioned. But would love for you to share in the comments, like, what's something that you're willing to commit to fully as a way of exploring this process and practice. And again, if you have any questions or comments as well, we'd love to get them from you before we wrap up here. And while we're doing that, while we're waiting for folks to respond here, I just want to share something which I find really fascinating is that, you know, the focus on attention really does teach you a lot about intention. What is my intention with my attention? Is
Hmm.
something I've been thinking about a lot and exploring. Oh, it looks like we got a comment. Dry brushing. That's what I'm going to do. Awesome.
Beautiful.
All right. Anyone else? Feel free to share those. Feel free to share those commitments here. We're here to honor and hold that for you and encourage you as well. This is an opportunity to experiment with your attention and your intention in order to manifest the results that you want to create with magic. And that's what we're all about here at Magical Experiments.
Yeah, that relationship between attention and intention is probably a whole other podcast, like because it's so foundational. But I like to kind of look at it as attention is the raw energy. It is our life force. It is our beingness that is being directed. Whereas our attention is like, what is it being directed to? What's it being directed for? Um, and that's why if we don't have a strong intention, it is so much more easier for our attention to get scattered, to get overwhelmed. So a lot of it is like really doing that internal work of like, no, what do you desire? What do you really want to bring through? What do you want to create? What is your intention? And there's a lot of both deep work and shadow and gold in those explorations.
Mm. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Um, I want to thank everyone who showed up here live to watch. This video will be going up in a little bit for those who missed it, and also if you want to watch it again. And again, we'd love to hear from anyone. You can feel free to drop a comment, afterwards on the video release of this episode. And of course, we're going to have some really exciting things coming up in Magical May, including the challenge that we're going to be doing in the second full week of May, another podcast episode like this, and much, much more. So we're looking forward to sharing all of that with you and kicking off the next iteration of Magical Experiments because we've got a lot more fun planned on the horizon.
Beautiful. Thank you all. Thank you, Taylor.
All right. Thank you, my love.